So before we get started talking about Shaw, I want to talk a little bit about the first vocab quiz and just go over some of those terms. In part because I think I might need to be a little bit more clear about what I want from you, and also because part of the point of this is reinforcement, right? You know, I want you guys to remember this shit. So, what I'm looking for. Right, first and foremost, I want you to be referring to a specific text for this course. In each of your answers, right? So it's great that several of you were referencing Walter Pater and Matthew Arnold and John Eddington Simons in your answers. But what I really want you to do is connect it to a text that's been assigned for this course, right? So really for this, all the answers for last week's test should have been what? Yeah, the picture Dorian Gray, Oscar Wilde, right? And I get that we only read one thing last week, so they would all be the same. But I just want you to get in the habit of connecting these terms to a specific text, right? And I want you to try to do this in your definitions as well, right? Right, so I want you to be connecting these concepts to the course text, right? So, you know, look for example, like, give me an example of, say, Hellenism and Hebraism in Dorian Gray, that sort of thing, right? I didn't take points off last time for not giving me Dorian Gray as the text answer or Oscar Wilde as the author, and I also didn't take points off if you weren't specifically connecting the concepts to the course text, right? Because I realized I hadn't really explained this. But yeah, this is what I want from you. And so what I'd like to do now is just kind of briefly go over the terms from last time, just so that we make sure everybody's got them, right? So let's start with Apollonian and Dionysian. What does this mean?
Rational versus the irrational.
Okay, yeah, which side is the rational and which side is the irrational?
Apollonianism is rational and Dionysianism is irrational.
Good, yes. And what does this have to do with art?
The indulgence of art. Being more self-indulgent.
It's not necessarily to do with self-indulgent, right? It's more the rational Apollonian idea. So Apollo is the god of light, of poetry, of music, and of math, right? So Dionysus is the god of wine, tragedy, dance, and total wild abandon, right? So what you create art, according to this particular theory of Nietzsche's, by giving the irrational an orderly form, right? So the Apollonian has to do with form, right? The order that you impose on irrational material, if that makes sense. Okay, Sybil Vane. This one should not be too hard, right? Who or what is Sybil Vane?
Dorian's love interest.
Yes. And why is she important? Why does she matter?
She represents the depth of all good or will to be good within him.
Okay.
He kind of clearly states it in the story. He states that everything that is good in him has been devoted or put into Sybil. And when she dies, he feels that part of him has died. And after that is when we specifically see him spiral out of control, so into vanity mostly, which connects to her last name.
Vane, yep. And what was it that he loved about Sybil in the first place?
That she wasn't herself.
Yeah, that she could inhabit all of these various roles, right? He loved her art, and he loved the masks that she could put on, right? Not her, he didn't love her for herself, right? Her real self was not of interest to him. All right, decadence. What was decadence in a specific late 19th century context?
They come from decay. And
Yes.
A lot of, like the world and just different concepts are slowly like dying. And,
Uh-huh.
just kind of everything's dying and nothing's going to stay the same.
Right. So what we have in decadence, or artistic decadence, is this notion that like things are in a state of decay, nothing is, like things aren't going to come back, right? You can't restore it to a previous state of goodness or purity. So what you need to do is just squeeze the last few drops of enjoyment or of sweetness out of what's left, right? You're just trying to squeeze the last couple drops of juice out of like a husk of a lime or something like that. All right, good. Platonic love.
It's not a physical, it's more of like a spiritual.
Mm-hmm.
It's not based on physical contact or connection, it's based on more emotions, like how you feel around that person or that object.
Well, that's the way we tend to use it now, right? But think back to kind of like when we were talking about it in the context of Basil's admiration of Dorian, right? What does platonic love start as? What do you begin with?
Friendship.
What's that?
Friendship? Does it start like as friends that like bros?
Well, what is the first thing that Basil loves about Dorian?
The way he looks.
Yeah, it starts with admiration of the body, right? It starts with those kind of more carnal feelings. And then those, the admiration of beauty leads to admiration of truth, right? It leads to a more spiritual love. All right, the Yellow Book.
It's a gift given to Dorian by Lord Henry,
Mm-hmm.
and it eventually consumes all of Dorian's life. He lives his life according to the book because he feels that it is his life pre-written before it has happened.
Yes, so yes, the book that Lord Henry gives Dorian that he's become obsessed with, right? It's a novel. And why the color yellow? Why is yellow significant to the decadence? Anybody remember?
Because it's the color of decay.
Yes, white, as it ages and decays, turns to yellow, right? All right. Walter Pater. Any of y'all remember Walter Pater?
That was Wilde's teacher. He was shy, and he wrote the book Studies in the Testimony of the Renaissance.
Mhm.
And basically, he said like things you study will continue on.
Okay, see, a part of his philosophy is this notion that, yeah, you find the seeds of each new era in the previous era, right?
Mhm.
And the things that stuff that's going on in this era will continue into the next, right? That eras in art history flow into each other rather than being kind of distinct hermetically sealed periods. But what's more important for the picture of Dorian Gray specifically is what Pater's aesthetic philosophy was. Does anybody remember that? Does anybody remember what Pater argued about experience and sensation?
Was it Heraclitus?
Okay, yeah, there's the quote from the Heraclitus, the Greek philosopher.
Oh,
Yeah.
I wrote that down. I was like, I don't know what that means. And I wrote it down.
But yeah, which essentially amounts to that everything is in a constant state of flux, right? So Pater's big argument is that familiarity deadens our senses, right? That when we look at the same object twice, we don't feel about it the way we did the first time. And so what we need to try to do is find ways to sustain that kind of like ecstasy that we experience in first having a powerful aesthetic impression. And so I'll leave it to you to think about how that can be applied to Dorian Gray, right? But I think that some of the applications to the plot of the novel here are fairly obvious. Lord Henry Wotton. Who is Lord Henry Wotton?
A friend of Basil's, and eventually kind of becomes like Dorian's best friend in a way.
Yeah.
He thinks he knows everything about everybody, that he's this all-knowing person, but in reality he knows absolutely nothing about who Dorian really is.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, he is constantly spouting a philosophy that sounds a lot like Walter Pater, right? But he doesn't actually seem to really live by it. He just kind of stands back and watches other people.
He's a posture.
He is indeed, yes. Although he would argue that this is not a bad thing, right? And that everyone is a poser. And who you are, and what matters is the pose you adopt and who you adopt it for. All right, aestheticism. What is aestheticism?
It's like, it's hard to explain. It's like something, I guess it can be like something like disgusting, it's like beautiful, and like I guess you find like beauty in just like anything.
Okay, part of the aestheticist philosophy is that the products of human industry are more beautiful than natural objects, right? Things that are artificial are more interesting and more beautiful than things that are natural. Right? So I gave you that Baudelaire poem, those lines in that Baudelaire poem about whale barf, right? And deer ass sweat being made into perfumes. So that's part of it. The main idea behind aestheticism, though, right, is that art has no purpose but to be beautiful. It's not supposed to teach you anything. It's not supposed to improve you morally. It's not supposed to make you money, right? It's not supposed to do anything except give pleasure to the senses, right? That is its highest and only purpose. All right, Basil Hallward.
He's the painter and in a way ultimately responsible for what happens to Dorian, because he creates the painting that kind of mixed with Lord Henry's philosophy that he likes to spout, takes over Dorian's life.
Yes.
And eventually kills him because Dorian tries to kill the painting but kills himself.
All right, and last one. Hellenism and Hebraism. Some of these might come back into play today when we talk about George Bernard Shaw as well. What was Hellenism and Hebraism?
Hellenism is like a personal, like based on self-knowledge and individual will. And Hebraism is like the fear of God and like obedience to an external authority. So like Hellenism is like just like yourself, like religion, I guess, and then like observation and reflection. And then Hebraism is basically the opposite.
Yeah, so what Matthew Arnold was talking about here, what he detected is kind of two separate cultural tendencies running through human history, right? Where Hellenism is a more kind of subjective way of being in the world that is dependent on your own observations and your own sense impressions and making sense of things for yourself. Where Hebraism is more about obedience to authority and following rules, right? And so one of the things that he's interested in is tracing the back and forth between these two ideas, these two systems of thought in human history, although he believes that a balance between both is really kind of necessary for the construction of a healthy culture, right? And I think this is something that might come back a little bit when we talk about Candida today. In part because Matthew Arnold was just so bloody influential in 19th century Britain. Okay. So let's move on from this then and talk about Shaw. So how did this play go for you? What'd you think?
It was interesting.
Okay. Interesting how? Like, what was interesting about it, or like different or unusual about it?
I don't know. I thought it was kind of just like the plot was just really random to me. Like, I don't know if that's just not what I was expecting, but like
Okay.
it was just like I was reading. I was like, is this really what's happening? Is this what we're doing? I was like, okay, well, I just went with it.
Okay. Well, let's take a minute and just try to trace the plot here of what's happening, right? So what actually happens in this play?
A married woman is being pursued by a man that is not her husband.
Okay, yeah. We have in the center, right, a married middle-class woman, right, Candida Morel, maiden name Burgess, and there's this kind of triangular structure here, right? Got on the one hand her husband, the Reverend James Morel, and on the other, an 18-year-old boy named Eugene Marchbanks. So on the surface then, like what familiar kind of plot trope does this all kind of look like? Yeah, it's the love triangle that's common in a romantic comedy, right? Although there are a few things about this love triangle, like what's weird about this love triangle?
I thought it was weird that like she invited Eugene in, and like I don't know, Eugene's like egging on Morel, and then was acting like innocent whenever she came around.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I guess that's not really not normal, but I thought that was kind of weird. And then her dad coming in, but then his typist lady liked him too. So I guess that's like another part of this triangle.
Okay, yeah.
So I don't know. There was a lot going on. There was just a lot going on.
Yeah, and you know, the people that Candida believes she has to share her husband, on the one hand, yet his typist, but also the audiences that he preaches to, right? So the preacher and poet characters would actually both have been really familiar to late Victorian theater audiences, right? They were both stock figures in romantic comedies, but they were not usually in the same play. You wouldn't usually have a preacher and a poet in the same play. And that's because they tended to fulfill the same role in this romantic comedy love triangle structure. The preacher and the poet were both seducer characters who came in to try to lure the married woman away. But in this case, we have a preacher and a poet pitted against each other. And poor unfortunate Candida, at the end, is told she has to choose between them, right? Now, how aware does she seem to be of what's been going on between her husband and Eugene all day?
She doesn't see anything until kind of like the last part that she was like, "What are you guys talking about?" When she came in, it's like, "What's going on?" But at the beginning of the day when they were arguing, I could be wrong, but I don't think that she knew what was going on.
I think she had an idea that something was going on, but she didn't know what. And she might not have cared until later on when it started getting a bigger thing.
Yeah, well, once they drag her into their nonsense, right?
She's like, it's like the mom. I don't care what you kids do, just don't drag me into it. And then they drag her into it, and then she cares.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you say like the mom, right? How does Candida behave through most of the play?
She's like Morel's like caretaker kind of.
Yeah. In fact, what is her reason for choosing to stay with James at the end of the play?
Because he's entirely dependent upon her.
Yeah.
He needs her for everything.
Yeah. James needs a mommy, right? Let's go there for a second. Let's look at that speech that she gives to Eugene about James. We look on page 233. Can I get somebody to read this speech for us, starting with "Never mind that just at present"?
Never mind that just at present. Now I want you to look at this other boy here, my boy, spoiled from his cradle. We go once a fortnight to see his parents. You should come with us, Eugene, and see the pictures of the hero of that household. James as a baby, the most wonderful of all babies. James holding his first school prize when at the ripe age of 8. James as the captain of his 11. James in his first frock coat. James under all sorts of glorious circumstances. You know how strong he is. I hope he didn't hurt you. How clever he is. How happy. Ask James's mother and his 3 sisters what it costs to save James the trouble of doing anything but be strong and clever and happy. Ask me what it costs to be James's mother and 3 sisters and wife and mother to his children all in one. Ask Prosy and Maria how troublesome the house is, even when we have no visitors to help us to slice onions. Ask the tradesmen who want to worry James and spoil his beautiful sermons, who it is that puts them off. When there is money to give, he gives it. When there is money to refuse, I refuse it. I build a castle of comfort and indulgence and love for him, and stand centennial always to keep little vulgar cares out. I make him master here, though he does not know it, and could not tell you a moment ago how it came to be so. And when he thought I might go away with you, his only anxiety was what should become of me. And to attempt to stay, he offered me his strength for my defense, his industry for my livelihood, his position for my dignity, his, I'm mixing up your beautiful sentences and spoiling them. Am I not, darling?
Thank you. So, what's her basic argument here as to why James needs her?
Because he can't do anything for himself. His entire life he's been coddled and everything's been done for him.
Yeah, has he ever been anything but a success?
No.
Yeah, his whole life up to this point has just been one long string of mental and physical successes, right? And all this has been made possible because the women around him shield him from any kind of unpleasantness, right? And just continue to make his life easy and a joy, right? Now, when we compare this to Eugene, right, what's Eugene's family life like? To the extent that he even has one.
He's basically taking care of himself. He hasn't had people just like him things or just been successful his whole life.
Yeah. Now, on the one hand, like he's of a higher social class than they are, right? the son of an earl or something. But he's the youngest son, and no one in the family gives a shit about him. Right, so Eugene, I think what's like, Morel originally found him sleeping on an embankment, right? Because he didn't realize that he couldn't, he's carrying around like this huge like trust document for some huge amount of money that he doesn't realize he can't just cash in. So on the one hand, Eugene really doesn't know the ways of the world, right? But he does know what it means to be unloved and to be lonely. Well, James has never had to experience that. So, what do you all think of the choice that Candida makes at the end of the play here?
I think she chooses to stay with her husband because it gives her more power.
Okay.
Both men are completely infatuated with her. And for Eugene, it's more of a simple infatuation. He saw her and he wanted her.
Uh-huh.
For James, all he's ever known is women that take care of him. This is a woman that takes care of him that's not related to him. So it's there is really no other choice provided for the two of them. She's the only one that has a choice, and she chooses to stay with someone who's entirely reliant on her, because without her, he is nothing.
Okay.
So it gives her power.
I'm going to question in a minute whether she's really given a choice here, or whether there's kind of like a false binary set up here or something like that. What do the rest of you think about this?
I mean, Eugene's like 18, right?
Which something she reminds him of as he's leaving,
and
right?
It says, like,
I'm 15 years older than you.
Yeah, she's like 30, and I was like, why? Because we all know, like, boys are like the most immature people. Like, I'm so sorry, but
it is true. Yeah, our brains don't develop as fast as yours do. That is true. Yes.
Why would this 33-year-old woman who has like a nice life, like she has a nice life, her husband is a preacher who they could be pretty well off. Mm-hmm. Why would she leave that life to go babysit at 18?
She's already babysitting though.
She could babysit an 18-year-old or continue to babysit a 40-year-old man.
Yes.
Right?
But I mean, she already has the 40-year-old like broken in, so I feel like.
Okay, so she certainly makes the easier choice, maybe, right? Yeah.
But Eugene, like the whole time, he doesn't agree with how Morel takes care of her. And he thinks that like he can do more than him, and he's like, why is she doing this stuff? Like we should be the one doing it. Why don't you have servants doing this stuff for you? But I feel as if like she doesn't mind. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but it kind of seems like she likes taking care of him. I mean, she didn't, like she'd leave.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, most of Eugene's objections to her doing anything seem to be aesthetic, right? Like he doesn't want her spoiling her white hands with paraffin wax by trimming the reading lamp, right? And like, why do we think he has such a strong negative reaction to the very idea of onions?
It's not a pleasant item.
Yeah, I mean, he nearly faints when she wants him to help slice onions, right?
He's an aristocrat. He's like, women don't do those things in those circles. Like the wives of aristocrats don't do those things.
Well, and yeah, because slicing onions does what to your hands?
They smell really, really bad. First
it makes them smell bad.
They make you cry.
Yeah.
It's just an unpleasant ordeal altogether.
Yeah. But most of his issues with the things that Morel Morel doesn't seem to question Candida. Like he never seems to ask her to do these things, right? She just goes and does them. But yeah, Eugene is bothered on aesthetic grounds. That like these are things that are unbefitting her beauty, right? So do either of these men seem to see Candida as someone who has any kind of existence of her own outside of their particular needs or their particular idealization of her?
Not really. I mean, Morel probably more than Marchbanks, but neither really gives much thought into who she is.
Yeah, and in fact, like the way the choice is framed at the end of the play, right? Like, you have to pick one of us.
Yeah, I thought that was like a joke at first. Like, whenever they were doing that, 'cause I was just kind of confused. Like, I wasn't confused, but I was like, why is, like, Eugene, like, you're 18 and you're trying to compete with this guy who's, like, been married to her? Like, that doesn't even make sense. And then when they were like, you need to choose, I was like, there's a choice? Like,
Yeah.
it's like,
Well,
what?
and Morel actually takes it seriously too.
Yeah,
right?
and then and they start saying it seriously. If I was him, I'd be like, go away, dude. Like, go away. But
I stand by my statement that they are children.
Oh yeah.
They are children.
Yeah. Well, in fact, like, you know, and a close reading of the play would bear that out, right? The stage directions early in the play call Morel a great baby. And then this Candida uses the same phrase to refer to Eugene a little later on, right? They're both great babies.
She's the mom that's like monitoring a play date, and like every play date between children, they don't want to share. One doesn't want to share his toys with his friend that came over.
Yeah.
That's just all I see when I look at this. I see a mom mediating a play date that went wrong.
I definitely like know like a lot of girls, I guess, that like wanna like a guy to like take care of. So I don't know. I can't tell if she likes being with him or if she just like stays with him because she doesn't know what he would do without her.
Yeah, there's this sense that she stays with him not out of her own need, but because of his, right?
She has a strong maternal instinct.
Well, and I think it's also probably worth it to think about some of the characters' names here, right? And what these suggest about characteristics that are attached to them, right? So what are the first two syllables of Candida?
Can and did.
Candid, yeah. And so the way the other two have to deal with her, right, is ultimately to reveal and accept their actual selves, right? They both have to stop posing, right? James has to stop posing as the successful preacher and well-known socialist orator and all-around good guy, and accept that he's a giant child who has never really been challenged in life and needs to be coddled, right? And Eugene needs to accept that he is only 18 years old and that you can't live on beautiful visions alone, right? In fact, Eugene, if we look at the way he's physically described when he first appears, where the hell is that? If we look on page 190, can I get somebody to read the stage direction there for us that starts with Morel comes back with Eugene, whom Burgess contemplates.
Morello comes back with Eugene, whom Burgess contemplates moist-eyed with enthusiasm. He is a strange, shy youth of 18, slight, effeminate, and a delicate, childish voice, and a hunted, tormented expression which with shrinking manner, that shew the painful sensitiveness that very swift and acute apprehensiveness produces in you, before the character has grown to its full strength. Yet everything that his timidity and frailty suggests is contradicted by his face. He is miserably irresolute, does not know where to stand or what to do with his hands and feet, is afraid of Burgess and would run away into solitude if he dared. But the very intensity with which he feels a perfectly commonplace position shews great nervous force, and his nostrils and mouth shew a fiercely petulant willfulness as to the quality of which his great imaginative eyes and fine brow are reassuring. He is so entirely uncommon as to be almost unearthly, and to prosaic people there is something noxious in this unearthliness, just as to poetic people there is something angelic in it. His dress is anarch. He wears an old blue serge jacket unbuttoned over a woolen lawn tennis shirt, with a silk handkerchief for a cravat trousers matching the jacket, and brown canvas shoes. In these garments he has apparently lain in the heather and waded through the waters, but there is no evidence of his having ever brushed them.
Okay, thank you. So, does Eugene look at all familiar to us? Is there a character we've encountered, maybe from a popular stage play that resembles Eugene at least slightly?
That dude from the opera.
Yeah. You remember?
his name.
Yeah, exactly. From the Gilbert and Sullivan opera, Patience, right? Reginald Bunthorne. Now, the difference here is that Bunthorne, in that play, is a confident and practiced liar, right? Who is putting on a pose. Is Eugene conscious of being a poser?
He is very naive.
Yeah.
And very deluded.
And one might suggest that in order to be a good poet, one must be at least slightly deluded, right?
Delusions definitely help with content.
I saw his word, he wasn't posing as being like a poet, like an aesthetic person. Or he was just trying to keep up with the times. Like he was trying to fit in almost.
And he is painfully unable to do so, right? He is clearly, in most respects, anachronistic, right? And I think that the fact that he's an aristocrat also kind of speaks to this, right? He's a member of a social class that is no longer as powerful or prestigious as it once was. Like by the 1890s, right? This play is published in 1895 and first performed in that year. The middle class has basically taken over by now. The professional classes are dominant. And yet Burgess, the businessman, still keeps sucking up to Eugene, right? He still wants to toady to this aristocrat. Maybe, more on that maybe in a minute. But yeah, so he keeps talking about, like if we look at the beginning of Act 3, where he's alone with Candida. He's been reading his poetry to her and apparently boring the shit out of her. He says on page 219, right, I was afraid of making you uneasy too. It looked as if it were a weapon. If I were a hero of old, I should have laid my drawn sword between us. If Morel had come in here, he would have thought you had taken up the poker because there was no sword between us. So, what's weird about this little bit of talk here? On the one hand, Candida doesn't understand it, right? She's like, what the hell are you talking about? Right, I can't quite follow that. Those sonnets of yours perfectly addle me. Why should there be a sword between us?
She's politely telling him that she thinks he's on drugs.
Yeah, like he's speaking things that have no meaning to her, right? That make no sense to her.
He's speaking like an aristocrat. And
Yeah.
she's like,
Uh-huh.
what are you doing? Like,
And
right.
in particular, a poet
Mhm.
with a particularly medieval sensibility, right? So does anybody know the Tristan and Isolde story? That the whole idea of the kind of the drawn sword between the two lovers is taken from? Yeah, they run away together into the forest from her husband, and they sleep with a sword between them to demonstrate their chastity, right? But Candida doesn't get the reference, right? Because it's clear that she doesn't really go in for poetry. And there's also a reference to King David and his wife Michal in the biblical story on page 197, right? Marchbanks suggesting to Morel that Candida secretly hates him, right? Oh, it's an old story. You'll find it in the Bible. I imagine King David, in his fits of enthusiasm, was very like you, stabbing him with the words, but his wife despised him in her heart. So, what he's referring to here is a slightly cryptic episode in the book of Samuel, in which David dances in a kind of scanty costume before the altar of the Lord, and his wife Michal, the daughter of the previous king Saul, is disgusted by the spectacle, and from that point forth despises her husband. So he makes these kinds of allusions all the time, right?
He's like that little kid that always got dragged into like the meetings or the dinners with his parents because they didn't have anywhere to leave him. So he learned a lot of big words, but he doesn't know what those words mean. So anytime he's out and about, he uses those big words to make himself seem older and smarter.
Actually, do we get the impression that Marchbanks doesn't understand these stories?
Yeah.
Yes.
Maybe it's kind of more like he knows them,
Mm-hmm.
but he doesn't know the whole like meaning of it. He's kind of like going around like, I'm smart.
He's like, here, I know this.
Mhm.
This somewhat fits here, but he doesn't explain it in a way that makes it fit.
Yeah.
He knows it, but he doesn't know how to use it.
Yeah, it's almost like he's trying to fit these kind of older narratives, right, onto his own life, right? He is living his life in terms of stories
Like
and in
Dorian.
terms of images from stories. Yeah, rather like Dorian, who is a similar sort of figure, right? So, Eugene is like Dorian, like Lord Henry, like Bunthorne, an aesthete. Even he's a more grubby kind of aesthete, right? His clothes are unbrushed and unwashed, and it's clear that his unearthliness is at least in some way genuine, and is, a result of kind of not having really touched down in the world. So let me give you some context for all this. We can talk a little bit about like what Shaw is responding to and what he's trying to do, and then maybe some of this will come together a little bit for us. So how many of y'all know what a melodrama is?
I've heard the term, but I
Okay.
can't like give you like an exact definition.
Okay. So when you say someone is being melodramatic, what does that usually mean?
Oh, it means something melodramatic.
Yeah, it means like they're being like really over the top emotional, right? Like more so than the situation seems to warrant. And that's a direct reference to the dominant form of 19th century drama. So, it's probably just worth saying like that most 19th century plays prior to about the 1870s are crap. Melodramas were generally fairly brief and very simple, right? If you're familiar with the kind of plot structure, where you have a young woman in a pure and simple white dress who has, she has some kind of, money problem, right? It's like, I can't pay the rent. And then, the guy in the top hat and the curly mustache comes in and is like, but you must pay the rent. But I haven't the money to pay the rent. Then you must sacrifice your virtue to me. And then the hero steps in from the other side with the money. I'll pay the rent. Saved, my hero. Curses, foiled again, right? That's melodrama in a nutshell. That's what it looks like, right? Nice. These very simple plays that were mostly intended for leading actors to display the range of emotions that they could play. Which is why we tend to associate this term now with overacting, right? Or with, emotional responses that are above and beyond
what is necessary.
Yes, or what is called for in the situation, yeah.
It was kind of like the old version of soap operas.
Yeah, the soap opera is directly derived from the 19th century melodrama. And you would have the same kinds of weird improbable twists, right? It's that wasn't me, it was my twin brother, or I got hit on the head and had amnesia, or whatever, right? So there's a French writer by the name of Eugene who develops a formula that he calls the well-made play. And a well-made play basically works according to four principles, right? The first, right, it begins, right, in media res, that is in the middle of the story, and only shows the climax of the action. The plot is dependent on what we call dramatic irony. Does anybody know what dramatic irony is, what this means?
Is it the one where we know something that the characters don't know?
Exactly, yes. Dramatic irony is when the audience knows something that not all of the characters know. So some secret is revealed to us that at least some of the characters remain ignorant of.
We know Juliet's not dead, but Romeo is ready to kill himself.
Exactly, good example. Now, the conflict in the play hinges on a misunderstanding caused by something like a misplaced letter or a conversation taken out of context. All right, the hero or heroine might overhear two people talking about something and misconstrue what it is they're actually discussing, and then that leads to conflict. But in the end, we're given a denouement in which misunderstandings are resolved and all the characters are happily reconciled. So this is what most popular 19th century plays look like. Right? Scribe ran a kind of workshop of writers that just churned these out by the hundreds. Right? Because when you've got an easy formula like this, it doesn't take much to write a play. Now, this all kind of comes crashing down in 1879. When a Norwegian playwright by the name of Henrik Ibsen who was at this point already established with a couple of like these kind of like dreamlike fantasy plays, like Peer Gynt. Premieres his new play, A Dollhouse. And are any of you familiar with A Dollhouse, with what the plot is? Has anybody read this before? Okay, so A Dollhouse, up until the end of the third act, follows this well-made play structure pretty exactly, right? You have a happy married couple, but there's a secret between them. And the wife is afraid that her husband won't love her anymore if the secret is revealed. And then, after a very stressful day, in the end, the husband learns the secret. They have a big fight. And then when the husband learns that the blackmailer who is hounding his wife has decided to give up and leave them alone, he just wants to go back to everything being the way it was. And what Ibsen does that's different, which is the model that playwrights like Shaw will then follow, is instead of this happy reconciliation where everybody just hugs and sings Kumbaya, he has the husband and wife sit down and have a conversation in which the wife tells the husband why she can't stay with him anymore. And the wife then leaves as the husband is reduced to a childish sobbing mess. So this play caused both positive and negative sensations throughout Europe, right? On the one hand, Ibsen got death threats, and there were people in the initial audience who were calling for his blood, right? It seems like a pretty extreme reaction to have to a play, right? My own theory is that, so the way people usually describe it is that, they were angry that a woman walked out on her husband and children. I think that a lot of the anger, though, was actually kind of due to the fact that they were conditioned to expect one kind of play and then got something else entirely, right? It's following the Eugene model right up until the end, and then it throws you a curveball. And it made people feel stupid, and people don't like to feel stupid, right? And Shaw is doing a similar thing in Candida. He's following a similar model, right? He's using the basic material and stock characters of a melodrama in order to really kind of have, in the end, I think this is a kind of conversation about Candida's role in the home and about the choices available to a late Victorian woman. So we're going to wrap it up here. There's just kind of two concepts I want to introduce to you briefly. Because I feel like we never have time to say quite as much as I want to say about it. Have any of you ever heard the term angel in the house before?
I think so.
Right, because you took Brenda too with me.
I did.
So do you remember, Bree, what the angel in the house was? Crap.
Or maybe, but I don't want to be wrong.
Okay, so I can't reach this. So
You just get it?
are you taller than me?
I'm like,
Do you have a bit more reach?
I'm pretty tall. I think I've gotten this before, Dr. Ryder.
Yeah, if you can give it a shot.
Oh.
Never mind.
Yeah, I think we're just going to have to leave it. I had some images to show you, but we'll just leave it because no one has gorilla arms here. So the angel in the house was the ideal Victorian wife and mother. Right? The home was her domain, and it was considered her moral duty, because women were morally better than men, to provide a safe home and hearth for her wayward husband and to provide a good example to him. So it's a backhanded kind of misogyny, right? Because women are morally better than men, then they should make themselves subservient and devote themselves to making sure men don't do naughty things. Now, at the time Shaw is writing this play, a new type is emerging who is referred to as the new woman. And the new woman is independent, right? She has a job, makes her own living, and adopts habits and dress that are considered masculine. So, she wears trousers rather than a skirt. She rides a bicycle. Bicycles were considered unladylike because you can't ride one side saddle. She smokes cigars. She drinks whiskey. She has a job. She may have gone to college. Women weren't allowed to take degrees in the 1890s at any English university, but they were permitted to attend. There were certain colleges that were set up at Oxford and Cambridge, and also at the University of London, specifically for women. And so Shaw is writing this play as this tension between the ideal housewife and this independent idea of womanhood are kind of really coming more and more at odds with each other, right? And so I think there is ultimately kind of argument about gender relations and women's responsibility to men at the heart of this play. And we're out of time. So I think I'll leave it to you to figure out what you think that is. But I think it might have something to do with that secret in the poet's heart that's mentioned at the end of the play but never explained to us. All right, so anybody have any questions there? So because I can't get this thing down, I will just email everybody the guide questions for today when I get back to my office. And we'll see you on... What days does this class meet? Thursday. Thursday.
It's Tuesday?
Yeah.